So, Elias, if you really have lived for 14,000 years, let's start at the beginning. What was it like? The first humans? The first society? The first fire?
Fire. The moment that changed everything. Before fire, we were animals cold, vulnerable, afraid. The night was an endless abyss, filled with shadows and unseen threats. We huddled in caves, listening to the sounds of predators stalking the darkness. We scavenged the remains of larger predators' kills, surviving on what little we could find. Then one day, a storm came. A lightning bolt split the sky, and when it struck a tree, flames spread like a hungry beast. We watched it for hours, mesmerized, terrified. It was alive, wild, untouchable. We had no words for what it was, only an instinct that told us it was dangerous and powerful.
And yet, someone had the courage to tame it. Who was the first? How did they know what to do?
No one knew what to do, Orion. The first to touch fire died. The first to breathe its smoke choked. But the first to observe, to understand it, he changed the world. You see, in those days, learning came at the cost of life itself. Everything we know now, every technology we take for granted, was paid for in blood.
Were you there?
I was. I watched as my tribe stood in the rain, staring at the burning tree. The elders called it a spirit, a gift from the gods, something to be feared and avoided. But one man, a young hunter, was different. He refused to run. He stepped closer. He reached out. And then he screamed.
He burned himself.
Yes. But he did not flee. He studied it. He watched how the fire danced, how it flickered with the wind, how it consumed but also transformed. He picked up a branch, and for the first time in history, a man carried fire in his hands. That moment, Orion, was when we ceased to be just another animal. It was the moment we became creators.
Fire gave humans power. Cooking, warmth, weapons, but also war and destruction.
Everything has a price, Orion. Fire was the key to survival. It allowed us to cook food, making it easier to digest, providing more energy. It kept predators at bay, lighting up the night. It hardened spears, making them stronger. It led to the first settlements, because now we could gather around something that kept us safe. But fire was not just survival. It was the first form of control.
Control?
The moment we tamed fire, we understood power, and power breeds control. He who controlled the fire controlled the people. Fire became sacred. Some claimed only the gods could give it. Others claimed only the strong could own it. Tribes fought. Villages burned. The first wars were not for land, they were for fire.
You're telling me the first war in history was over fire?
It wasn't just a war, Orion. It was an idea. Whoever held the fire could decide who lived and who died. And from that moment on, war was never about the thing itself, but what it represented. Resources, power, control. Fire was just the beginning.
That's terrifying. And yet, it makes perfect sense. Humanity's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness.
We build, we destroy, we discover, we corrupt. It is who we are, Orion. And it all started with a single flame.
But tell me, Elias, how did fire spread? How did it go from a single man holding a burning branch to something that shaped civilizations?
It took generations. At first, it was guarded like a treasure. Tribes would keep embers alive for days, carrying them in hollowed-out bones or wrapped in dried moss. The ability to make fire from nothing, that was the true revolution. Once humans learned to create fire themselves, we were no longer at the mercy of nature. We became masters of our own fate.
And yet with mastery comes arrogance. Humans didn't just use fire, they abused it.
Exactly. The same flames that cooked food and kept us warm, burned forests, and wiped out entire villages. Over time, fire became a symbol. It marked power. It became divine. Temples built flames into their altars. Kings demanded eternal fires to prove their strength, and warriors burned their enemies' homes as a sign of conquest. Fire was no longer just a tool. It was a weapon.
And the first war over fire, it must have been brutal.
It was. Imagine Orion, a time when knowledge was scarce, and every new discovery was met with both awe and fear. When fire was controlled, it created order. When it was stolen, it created chaos. The first wars were not fought over land or gold, they were fought over control of this force. Because fire meant survival, and in a world where survival was everything, those who held it held the future.
And this was before writing, before history as we know it. There were no records, no laws, just raw survival.
Precisely. The knowledge of how to create fire was passed down through stories, through elders whispering to the next generation. It became legend, and legends are dangerous.
Because they change over time.
Exactly. By the time the first civilizations merged, fire was no longer just a tool. It was a symbol of divine power. The gods themselves were said to wield fire. The priests and kings claimed dominion over it. Entire societies were built around who controlled the flame. Fire was knowledge, and knowledge was power.
So in a way, fire was the first technology. The first knowledge that separated humans from nature.
Yes, and the first step toward civilization. But it was only the beginning.
Then let me ask you one more thing. If fire was the first great leap, what was the second?
Now that is a story worth telling.
I think I know what you're going to say, but I'd rather hear it from you.
If fire gave us power over nature, the next step was learning to harness that power in new ways. The second great leap, Orion, was the dawn of agriculture, and that changed everything.